This is Hannibal here, and in recent weeks, I've posted actually clips from two Ric Flair interviews that our video gave me permission to post. One is the 2009 Ric Flair shoot interview, which I guess was done shortly after he was released from TNA, and then there was another one from around the same time, a face-off interview with Ric Flair and Terry Funk, where you could say Flair did most of the talking. It was clear that Funk really likes Flair, and Flair really likes Funk, and Funk was really enjoying himself with Flair. I enjoyed the single interview with Flair more. I had seen pirated clips of it that had been posted here and there on the internet over the years. Of course, the big thing from this interview, the most outrageous. I'll give Ric Flair the benefit of the doubt, and I'll say his most outrageous confusion is when he talks in this interview about being there the night that Bruiser Brody was murdered in Puerto Rico, where he wasn't advertised for the show. There's no record of him being on the show. Nobody that was there that night mentions anything about him being there. And actually, between the two interviews, although Flair puts Brody over, he almost sticks up for the killing of Brody in a way in both interviews, both the Funk one and the regular shoot interview. Not necessarily fully condoning it, but he was claiming, like, in the one interview, that Brody had just put Jose Gonzalez in the hospital for a month before Gonzalez killed him. It's like they were both baby faces. They actually hadn't wrestled each other at the time of the killing for quite a while. A lot of people believe that the Office probably owed him money, which was common for the WC Puerto Rico office to owe people money. He definitely bled out a long time. It didn't sound like anyone tried first aid on him. I mean, Dutch Mantel claims he was in Vietnam in the military. I was in the military, okay, in 2000, 2001. You learn pretty good first aid. Obviously, he was probably too cowardly to try and do first aid on Bruiser Brody as he was bleeding out there, because he was probably afraid that somebody might stab him if he were to try and help him. Seemed like the only one that tried to help him really that night was Tony Atlas, who I'm doing another interview with this weekend, by the way. I'm not going to digress too much into that. I'm just going to say he wasn't there. Through all my research, Flair fully made that up. I still like Flair. He's one of my favorite wrestlers as far as promo ability, in-ring ability, storylines he's been in. He likes to talk a lot about these hour matches he's had, both in this interview and the Terry Funk interview. To me, the hour matches were extremely boring. They were extremely boring. I understand why they did them, and I understand why he's proud of them. But that whole hour match scenario, it's just not my cup of tea. I mean, that match he had at WrestleMania 8 with Macho Man was one of my favorite matches of Ric Flair. That didn't go anywhere near an hour. Some of the only matches I'm not a big Bret Hart fan, because I'm not a big fan of technical wrestling, because to me, if I want to see real technical wrestling, I'll watch amateur wrestling, because fake technical wrestling, known as chain wrestling in wrestling, is just people going through motions, and it doesn't really teach you anything about, like, if I want to watch technical wrestling, I'll watch like UFC or amateur wrestling where I could actually learn about something. Whereas like fake technical wrestling and pro wrestling, I mean, it doesn't really teach you anything about what could work in a real fight. So well, there is a place for it here and there, transitioning into different areas. Like, I don't want to sit there and watch an hour technical match, but I did find the Ric Flair versus Bret Hart matches entertaining. I saw a couple of them live, actually. Here in Ottawa, I remember one specifically in November of, I think, 92 or 93. But I won't digress into that. Overall, it's sad because in the one interview, Reed is still alive. His son Reed is still alive, and he's talking about Reed taking his place in Japan and him managing Reed in Japan and all of this, all these people that are supposedly interested in hiring Reed. And then in the Terry Funk one, Reed has passed away. And the one part in the Terry Funk one that I found a little bit like bothersome is when there's talking about that they each have no regrets. I mean, if I had a son that passed away at a young age due to drug use, I mean, I would definitely have a lot of regrets. But you can't hold those regrets against yourself. But I found it weird that he seemed to indicate he had no regrets considering that situation. He talks a lot about his time in TNA in this interview, which is a very forgettable run overall. The main thing I remember from him in TNA was a really horrible match between him and Mick Foley, and the promo that he did with Jay Lethal. Those are the two main things. Other than that, it all just kind of blends together. He mentions that TNA was having him do house shows that they weren't advertising him for. TNA always had, I mean, I don't know what, I know they have a guy that I don't particularly like or have any respect for running their marketing department now for live events. I don't even remember his name offhand, but I dealt with him in 2017. And I didn't find he was particularly good. I don't know if it was the same guy back then, but when I promoted TNA's first tour in Canada in 2007, which was just a couple of years before Ric Flair was in TNA, they would not talk about the shows on their TV show, which to me, it's just crazy. You have a television show on Spike TV and you're not promoting your own house shows on the TV show, not even mentioning them. And Ric Flair mentions that like he would go to these TNA shows and there'd hardly be anyone there because he's not even advertised for the show. Though he actually claims the reason that he stopped with TNA was because they wanted him to appear on shows that he wasn't advertised for and he just wasn't going to do it. He also mentions he didn't like how TNA broke kayfabe by having all the wrestlers sign autographs, baby faces and heels together for the events and at intermission. I mean, they had. I understand where Flair is coming from, but I also understand that the TNA. I think Dave Meltzer said he's not sure if there's ever been 1 year that Impact in the entire existence has ever made money. It's like they've been a tax write-off their entire existence. But I understand why TNA would have had guys like Ric Flair sign autographs before and at intermission if they were getting an amount from him because they had to like get as much money as they could because they weren't getting when Flair and Hogan and Bischoff were there. I mean, they were probably getting the biggest crowds of the whole entire time they were around, but their roster was the highest paid. And I don't think they ever like had a roster with that much star power on it ever again after that Flair, Bischoff, Hogan time period. The last real like superstar that they brought in for TNA that they probably paid well would have been Ken Shamrock. There's some that have gone on to be stars, and there's some like Joe Henry now that's like on NXT and TNA, but he's not the fame of a Ken Shamrock. I don't think they have anyone you could really call famous, like a Ken Shamrock, Ric Flair, Mick Foley, Hulk Hogan anymore in TNA. It's funny. He says he didn't like his matches with Abyss. Abyss, I think, is a WWE road agent now. But overall, interesting interview. I don't know. There's been more recent interviews with Ric Flair. He always, like I said the other day when I critiqued Bill Watts' interview, I thought Bill Watts was fairly honest in his interview. I thought Lex Luger was honest in his interview. I don't think Ric Flair was fully honest in his interview. He was maybe 75% honest in his interview. There was one story too that I'd never heard before, where Ric Flair said that, and I never heard it. I'm not saying this is a lie or not. Where he claimed that Bruiser Brody pushed over a handicapped child at some taping in the 80s, and he tried to get Terry Funk to confirm it. Terry Funk didn't deny it, but I'd never heard any story about Bruiser Brody pushing over a handicapped child. That to me was interesting. Not interesting, but like it put up some question marks. Did this actually happen or not? Anyways, guys, that's my review of the Ric Flair interview. He's done more recent ones, but with more people like that aren't in wrestling, like Theo Vaughn and ex-football players and Rampage Jackson, that don't ask quite as detailed questions. He's done some podcasts where he answers questions as well, but this was really his first shoot interview. So the one thing I will say is, my God, why? I mean, and he does. I haven't seen him do this on the more recent ones, but why chew tobacco during an interview? I mean, someone's probably paying you, I'll only guess, maybe $5,000-$10,000 to do an interview, maybe more. I really don't know how much it would have been back then, but can you not chew tobacco for like 2 hours? Or are you that addicted that you have to chew tobacco while you're doing an interview? I find that, and he's not the only one that does it. A lot of wrestlers do it, but give me a break. Go. At least pay the guy that's paying you money somewhat respect, and the fans buying these videos of the respect of not chewing tobacco and having us look at your disgusting spit cup during the whole interview. To me, that was the downside of the interview. So that's about it for Ric Flair's RF video.